But in fact, this is a legitimate question that I have for both of you, is that you create products that are necessary, you create products that are meaningful, you create products that are powerful and important, but they are addressing topics that nobody would necessarily describe as fun. They are things that we have to do more than things we want to do, for the most part. And I'm curious to know what kinds of challenges does that present specifically in getting people to enjoy something that is, for the most part, inherently kind of boring and kind of drudgery.
So you are correct. The areas that we tackle every day when we come to work are those chores that people need to do on either a daily, weekly, monthly, or annual basis, right? And it really is the business of life. We talk about how we're here to simplify the business of life. Now, what's interesting, though, is it really depends upon the spin that we put on it. So, for example, you can look at your taxes as a chore to be done, or you can look at your taxes as something that allows you to reflect on your life and the accomplishments that you've had thus far. When we look at any product at Intuit that we design, we think about 3 factors that impact people's delight or their enjoyment of that. First of all, we expect to create a benefit that people care about. Second, it needs to be easy. And finally, it needs to evoke positive emotion. And there are a lot of different ways of evoking positive emotion. And our designers are doing their magic when they're going at that in different ways.
Yeah, and Sam, I build on that. The thing we have to do inside for our designers and for our engineers is to paint a brand challenge and to make it something that's visceral to the customer. So we talk about tax preparation as 2 things. 7 billion hours a year are spent inputting information into software to do your taxes. And half of Americans, the single biggest check they'll get is their tax refund. And so our vision is to eliminate 7 billion hours of tax prep drudgery and get to the money as fast as possible. That inspired engineers. We put one more constraint in, which was, and by the way, it needs to happen now on a mobile device. That's where the computers are now moving to. And so our team was inspired to do something called SnapTax. They took a picture of W-2 documents, have optical character recognition, read the data, pre-fill your entire tax return, and in a matter of minutes your taxes are done and you've got money on your way. And that's the kind of thing that gets designers excited. And by the way, that's the thing that transforms customers' lives.
And this all fits into a concept in your company that you call design for delight, right? And is that the 3 principles that you were talking about? Is that what sort of rolls up into design for delight, or is that something larger?
Design for delight is a little bit larger than that.
Yeah.
So let me go back a little bit in time and paint a picture of some things that were happening back in 2007, 2008. So back in 2007, 2008, internally we as a company realized that we were no longer as proud of the experiences that we were creating. That in many cases we were no longer any better than our competitors. And that was a really hard thing for us to realize because Scott founded us as a very customer-centric
Can I
company.
interrupt you for a second and ask you what happened? How did you wind up in that position? What do you think?
So I think that what happened is that initially Scott Cook was our founder and he was very much involved in the day-to-day, and that was easy to do when the company was smaller, but as we grew larger and larger and larger and larger, it was harder to scale that passion for the customer. Right? And I think that frankly we took our eye off the ball and we started to get a little bit sloppy.
So you realize this?
We realized this. At the same time, externally what was happening is there was resurgence in Apple and great design there. Mobile was really coming into play with the simplicity and the elegance of those designs. And we realized that we needed to change and we needed to become a design-driven company. And we went after that with 3 strategies. First of all, we made sure that everybody in the company had a visceral experience of what great design was like. And we started with our most senior leaders. Brad had his team at an offsite, and we had them each bring in something that delighted them. In some cases, it was a cork pop, which is what Brad brought in. Back in 2007, people were bringing in iPods, or they were even bringing in the universal remotes, right? And we had them talk about what made that experience delightful to them. And when they spoke about it, they started to relive those emotions that they were feeling. And emotions are contagious. And after 8 or 10 people had shared their experiences, the entire room was feeling really good. And that's when we locked in on, this is how we want our customers to feel. At the same time, the company that we had was much more of a process excellence operations culture at the time. And so we needed to shift it. And by looking out externally at other companies, we realized we wanted it to be a design thinking company. And what we call design for delight is what everybody else calls design thinking. And that includes getting very, very close to your customers, having deep customer empathy, going very broad before you get very narrow, and doing rapid experimentation with customers. It's nothing that any designer out there doesn't already know about, right? But what we did, with the help of Suzanne Pelican and others, was to really make that a part of our culture using these innovation catalysts. Now we have everybody in finance and legal and marketing and product care using design for delight or design thinking to solve problems better. also realized that design thinking and having everybody really appreciate the power of design was also not enough. We needed super strong designers. So a few years ago, we started to go down the path of design leadership. I started to lobby various general managers to hire design directors. We went from 2 to about 10. We have design strategists who are working on company strategies as well as new offerings, as well as in our core offerings in care and in marketing. And the 3 of those factors together have really shifted us as a company in our focus on delight. Now that delight pyramid is an important tool for us because we found through very rigorous techniques, and by the way, executives love rigorous techniques and love data. So through some very rigorous techniques with our behavioral economists, we found that those 3 factors, right, benefit I care about, ease, and evoking that positive emotion, together they independently account for about 75% of the variance in Net Promoter, which means it's really good.
So now, Brad, I'm curious, Kaaren, you're a designer, so your role is focused in that area. Brad, you're the CEO of the company.
Yes.
Your responsibilities, your focus is spread across any number of issues. But what I'm curious about, what does it mean to you to be a CEO of a design-driven company? What are you doing to keep that environment fertile?
Yeah, I would say there are 2 things, Sam. First of all, the role and the value that I can add is to create the environment where the greatest designers can do the best work of their lives. And the other piece of that is to help the entire organization understand that design is a team sport, that every single one of us have a role to play in design. So the first thing Kaaren walked through is this mindset shift. Imagine a CFO or a general counsel sitting there and saying, well, what do I have to do with design? And you tell them to come in and describe the favorite product experience of their lives and tell us why you love it. And you have people coming in and talking about these kinds of products that Kaaren went through, and you do a word cloud. And what you find out is there are common themes in everyone's favorite experience. I thought I was going to get this, but it also did this. And I thought it was going to be hard, but it was drop dead simple. And here's how I felt, and I grabbed my daughter and showed her. So right off the bat, you said, look, you have an appreciation for the importance of design. But then the second thing you have to do is help the organization understand you have Jedi Knights, which are designers. But their job is to turn their individual ability into organizational capability. So what we ask the designers to do is what we call the 3 E's. To energize, to educate, and to empower. Their job is to leave everyone's heart beating faster about the power of design. Energize an organization, say here's what we're going after. Educate is to teach them the design for the right methodology so they know how to do it. And empower is to not have to be present for good things to move forward. And so those are the things we try to do, is create the environment, give everybody that visceral understanding they have a role to play, and create a space for great designers to do great work.
And that's not to say we're perfect, we're still getting better every day, but we are making significant progress.
Well, we're having a lot of fun.
That's good. What, in these past, call it year or 2, you've been part of a movement that's seen a growth in certain mobile payments, online banking. The world of money and how it is managed is undergoing significant change. What in that whole world has surprised you in the last couple of years that you didn't expect to see come along that really has taken hold and changed maybe a little bit the way you think about what you do?
Well, I'll start. I think probably the most fundamental shift that's helped us really turbo drive our power of design thinking is the constraints brought on by the shift of platform devices to more mobile devices. So one of the things we discovered is every piece of information you ask for on a mobile device actually cuts conversion by 50%. So if you have general managers who are trying to actually drive the business growth and they have to deal with this constraint, then you really have a really elegant challenge for designers to have to think through with their engineers and their product managers. So that's the biggest fundamental shift. The other thing that I have found extremely interesting is the empower of the triad. It used to be that when we said we're going to be a design-driven company and we're really going to strive to do that, the engineer said, well, here's the technology constraints. The product manager said, well, here's the thing we have to solve, and then they gave it to designers to make it pretty before it ships. And that is not the way we can get at that design-driven thinking. So what we now have is we have a triad where the designer, the product manager, the engineer are going through these efforts together. And they're inspired by the things that are constraints, like the mobile devices. The lesson we had to learn is you can't put an elephant on a diet and get a mouse. So design is not about taking everything that we offer here and getting it down here. It's getting really focused on what is the thing we have to deliver and nail, and then letting the design drive the technology and all the other pieces that go into it. And that's probably been the single biggest shift that I've experienced.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of the surprises I had is that despite all of the technology changes, people's relationship to money at their very core is still very similar. Like most people still are awake at night because they're concerned about their financial situation. And so that actually provides an help people who are lower income workers to sleep better at night? And what are the ways that we can better help technology to help you run your life? Particularly when people are getting more removed from it, as you're starting to use more devices to pay as opposed to cash or even credit cards.
I was wondering if you could tell me an example of maybe a mistake, something you learned from. It's much more interesting, I think, to hear about that than we had a great idea and we were right. Was there something that you went down a road and it was the wrong road, but it taught you something incredibly valuable?
So we've had a lot of mistakes.
Put it on my tab.
So one of the big ones that we had actually early on in the journey when we started to launch the Design for Delight initiative, which, as I mentioned earlier, is really how do we really bring design thinking into the DNA of Intuit. We started off with what I thought was going to be fantastic. We had, senior leadership sponsorship. Our founder, Scott Cook, was really the corporate sponsor of this. And we brought in all of these external experts to come and speak, and the way it was created, the external experts would speak, the entire company would watch our Delight forums. They would get together with their general managers, bubble up what they had learned, what their aha was, and what they were going to do differently, and then Brad would have a conversation with them at his next CEO staff meeting. Right? So we felt like there was a lot of accountability here. We had a great Design for Delight process that we put out everywhere, and after a year, absolutely nothing had changed. And it was a year of feeling like, wow, the world is our oyster. Finally, design is going to be able to help change a company, and we were absolutely capable of doing it. And what we hadn't realized at the time was that talking is worthless, and the gap between knowing and doing is tremendous. And so we had to go back to square one, and we had to run various experiments with how do we help people to start doing this design thinking, and how do we help them to fall in love with how good it feels to spend more time with the customer, to come up with more ideas, or to throw things away. And it wasn't until we actually created a series of coaches called the Innovation Catalysts that Design for Delight actually took off and became a part of our DNA.
Well, so that makes me wonder a little bit about bridging that communication gap between design professionals and non-design professionals. What is it? It sounds like Innovation Catalyst is one way for that to happen.
So on the one hand, we're trying to take the company, or actually we have taken the company, and we have imbued them with design thinking, which means that now when a designer says, hey, I need to go broad, everybody knows that that's a good thing, right? Even if they don't know that the designer's going broad is like hundreds of ideas, whereas their going broad might just be 12, right? It's okay, it's all good. At the same time, we've taken our designers and we have a very serious influence training program that we have been giving them. So that they are expected to be very influential and impactful, but we don't expect them to be able to do that right away, right? So we've gotten them to have a seat at the table, but now we need them to really own their spot at that table. And it's about a 2-year program. It includes coaching, mentoring, and whatnot.
And the thing I would add, and this is a lot of what Kaaren was just talking about, there's an old proverb that says that when the student is ready to learn, a teacher will appear. We could have had all the innovation catalysts we wanted, all the design for life methodology we wanted, everything we could have ever wanted, but until people truly understood the power of design, saw it around them in their personal lives, and also recognized it in competitors. I mean, we began to put into our operating reviews, take me through a competitor I never heard of, so someone who's just started up from Stanford dorm room or someplace else, and tell me the 3 things you admire about them. And that really started to get people awakened to the fact that there is the power of design happening in our space as well as the things we're using in our personal lives. And then all of a sudden there was a pull for design thinking. How do I get that elegance? How can I actually be better than that? How can I view that into my sort of system? And that's when the innovation catalysts were there to actually solve the problem together.
Is that now something that also affects when you're recruiting people and bringing them into the organization? Is that informing the process there as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you that a lot of designers really want to work in that environment. It's an environment in which they can truly thrive. And that's our vision, right? We want Intuit to be the place where designers can thrive and can do the best work of their lives.
Well, I'm a very satisfied user of TurboTax myself, and it's actually that time of the month for us.
Time of the year?
Time of the year.
Just like I'm sure.
Yeah. I'm not even going to say anything. I'm just going to, oh, look, we're out of time.